Welcome to episode 197 of the Lone Hockey Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Carolina and Chicago. And I felt like this was a game where Chicago, they really had it. They were really close to being able to get a win and secure a win. And they had points in the game where they were up by, I believe, a couple goals, and then it was up by one, and they tied it multiple times. It was just kind of chaotic and it was all over the place. But I really thought that Chicago, and I know they haven't won too many games this year, but I really thought they had a chance to win this game. And Carolina, they ended up climbing their way back in this game. I gotta give them credit. They're out shooting them a lot for majority of the game as well. I believe they're doubling their shot total as well. And for majority of the game, especially throughout the second, the midway portion of the second period, Carolina was really able to ramp up their shot volume. I felt like that was able to allow them not only to get more ozone time, but also just be able to create more volume on their possessions. They felt like they were able to create a lot more in that sense, and they were a lot more dynamic when it came to creating possession scenarios and play driving scenarios, and they were able to do a lot of forechecking and also incorporate a lot of skill into the game. And they have some really good players, obviously really talented and also really competitive team. Like one of the more disciplined teams I think I've ever seen when it comes to forechecking, how they angle guys and how they close guys off. I feel like the routes are consistent, but their timing is effective and they get there on time. Like their F1 and F2 and F3, they're all kind of in sync. So it really allows them to work nicely together and in tandem with each other. So we'll start with some standouts. I thought Jacob Slavin was really good and notably not an offensive defenseman, but was playing like one in this game. He had three assists, he had one shot. He was just all over the puck offensively. I thought he was really controlling situations with his playmaking. His pass first game was noticeable. Obviously, he's a really skilled puck moving defenseman, but you look at how he moves the puck and how his timing is really good. And that really allows him to be able to have a little bit more success on occasion offensively from time to time. Again, he's not a super offensive, uber-minded offensive defenseman, but at the same time, he brings some degree of impact offensively. And he can really, in critical situations, he can be a guy that can be relied upon offensively as well. I feel like he's one of those underrated guys who he has offensive ability. It's just the style of play that he has. He doesn't necessarily rely on it a ton. And then Sebastian Aho, of course, their first line or second line center. He was playing second line in this game. I believe it was Jordan Stahl and then it's Svechnikov with Jackson Blake in the first line. I'll get to Jackson Blake later. But I really liked Aho's game. I always think he's one of the more underrated guys in the league too. Like Carolina has a lot of players on their team who are really underrated and don't necessarily get a ton of credit. I don't know if it's the market or how they play or whatnot, but Carolina is always up there in terms of being one of the top teams in the league, and they always have players who produce, especially in recent years, past handful of years, 4 or 5 years or so. So this was a really great game from Aho, just a really well-rounded game, an all-around game. Two-way play was noticeable. His transition play was noticeable. His offensive play was noticeable. He was just noticeable on both sides of the puck. He was really effective at creating a lot of volume, both via passing and also his shooting ability. So he's really effective in both ways. And then Seth Jarvis, who actually played for the Chicago Wolves a few years ago, so sort of homecoming of sorts for him, but not really. And anyway, Jarvis is just he's super underrated. You talk about underrated two-way wingers in the game. Right now, he's one of those. He's all over the puck. He's very competitive, very tenacious, very engaged in the ozone, very engaged deep in the ozone. And he really likes to work the back wall. He really likes to work 1v1. He's really skilled and really underrated at getting through guys' hands and being able to negate guys' hands. Just an all-around very effective player and very exciting player to watch in that sense, and he does a lot of good offensively as well. And Marty Necas, of course, was really good. That Jordan Stahl was really good, especially from interior space in the ozone. He's really noticeable there. And of course, his shutdown play is always noticeable. That's what he's most well known for in terms of how he plays the game. He's mostly a shutdown style player who can bring some offensive ability, but not necessarily a ton. So he was really good throughout the game. I was really impressed with him. And then I really like Jesperi Kotkaniemi as well. I felt like there's been occasions where he's played really well against Chicago multiple times, and obviously he's only played in the East. He's only played in Montreal, and he's only played with Carolina so far in his career. So he hasn't played Chicago a ton, but I've always noticed his game against Chicago. I feel like it's his two-way play that stands out, his routes that stand out, his neutral zone play that stands out. I always feel like there's some degree of consistency in how he is in terms of timing as a center in the neutral zone. And I feel like he's played really well in the past against them. He might not necessarily be a super high octane point producer against them, but he's brought noticeable details in terms of positioning that have stood out to me more than anything else. So he was really good. And then Jackson Blake, I wanted to get to as well because he obviously played for the Chicago Steel a couple years ago and just a really skilled player. Was playing on their top line, has been up and down their four lines throughout the year, and has been playing really well. Like he's gotten some top unit power play time on the flanks. The speed in which he's processing situations has transformed so much from where he was 2 years ago to now. Like his skating has improved dramatically, especially from a power skating mechanic standpoint and how he is accelerating on his edges and how he's using his outside edges. I feel like his timing is much more locked down and he just looks better and more well-rounded as a player. He's been really underrated for them this year. I feel like you're not necessarily gonna see a ton of offense out of him, especially him being a guy who moves up and down the four lines. Like it's hard to get some offensive consistency when you're doing that. But for him, he's still playing on the team and he's still really young. So he's gonna have a lot more time to improve. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I wonder if next year if he's gonna be a full-time guy too, or if he might get some time eventually in the AHL. I'm curious to see how his future winds up with Carolina and how that works, but it's really good for him that he's able to make, for one, he's able to make a really good team at the start of the year and continue to be on it. He's going to be on the team the rest of the season. So, and then two, just being able to have that sense, that awareness, that well-roundedness to be able to play with anybody is really effective for him. Just allows him to be able to adapt much better and much easier than some other players in the league. And then Chicago's standout, we'll talk about Ryan Donato, of course, 2 points, 1 goal and assist and just very effective all around player as well. Speed, tenacity, forechecking ability. I bet, and right now I would say he's one of their best trade assets for this coming deadline. I feel like if you're looking for a middle six style winger, and especially if you're a playoff contending team, Ryan Donato could be your guy who can bring some scoring and bring some tenacity, bring some compete level, and just bring some all around effectiveness as a player. And his trade value is really high this season. I feel like this is the time to trade him because you might be getting the most out of him this season. So you can trade him, get some really good assets back, and then see what is in store for the rest of the team. I feel like there's a lot of guys the Hawks could move, but I don't necessarily see them moving a ton of them right away. Like Lucas Reichel's been all over trade rumors, Philip Kurashev. You look at even Tyler Bertuzzi and Donato, and who else am I missing off the top of my head? There's Taylor Hall, if I didn't say him already, and Seth Jones is the newest one right now. I don't necessarily see him getting traded anytime soon, but a guy you can certainly. It would make sense why they would trade him because they're such a young team right now. It doesn't look like they're going to be getting any better anytime soon over the course, I would say, the next 2, 3 years. And Seth Jones is already 30 years old. The 2, 3 more years of the Hawks being bad, he's going to be 32, 33. So it's going to be a challenge to try and move him then. It's already going to be a challenge to try and move him now. But with the rising cap and how the cap is going to likely continue to go up, yes, it's not the best contract, but at the same time, it could be worse, especially with the rising cap. That contract's not necessarily going to look as bad as because there's a lot of defensemen who are going to get paid a lot now in this modern era because a lot of defensemen, for one, are skilled, offensive minded, and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of defensemen out there who simply just because of the market and the cap and how the cap continues to rise every single year now, and especially after the post-COVID effects, like and how dramatically it's going to continue to rise. And I believe there could be a point where I don't know which agent said it, but there could be a point in the next handful of years where the cap could go over 100 million, depending on how the NHL trends and whatnot, and what happens with everything. But if it goes over 100 million, you're going to be seeing a lot of these defensemen get paid like Seth Jones is getting paid. So, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily the worst deal, especially when you look at it over a long-term course. I feel like it's actually going to be a better deal because it's going to be a little bit more affordable and more defensemen are going to be they're going to be getting paid more. So but with Seth Jones, definitely a guy you'd look to move, I feel like, because he's not the most consistent. Yes, he has untapped offensive upside. I feel like he needs to be in the right situation on the right team to be able to unlock that. And it's really hard to justify what his true ceiling is throughout the rest of his career, especially the last, I don't know, next 5 years or so. It's really tough to judge what he could be. And but yeah, if you're looking to trade a guy, I would say trade him because that contract is much easier to trade now than it will be 5, 6 years from now. It's gonna be a much harder tra contract to trade in that point of time. So you might look to trade him now. Again, the Hawks are a young team and they have a lot of skill. It's just more a matter of they need support options up front and they just need to round out their defensive core. I feel like it's going to take a little bit longer than we think, maybe beyond 3 years or so, three, maybe four, maybe five. I don't know. But there's a point where I just feel like Seth Jones is going to get moved, and they're already taking a ton of calls on him, apparently. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But back to some standouts. Philip Kurashev, 2 point game. He was back in the lineup this game, goal and assist. He was really consistent in terms of play driving ability, and obviously he hasn't found a consistent role on the team this year. Last year, he was a consistent top 6 guy and playing with Connor Bedard regularly at 5-on-5 in the power play. And those two were lethal together last year. And this year it's just kind of the opposite effect, which is kind of weird to say. But I feel like if you can get Kurashev going back with Bedard again, that could be a really good tandem to try and work off each other once again and try to see what more they can do together. And then we could talk about Taylor Hall. We could talk about Connor Bedard and Seth Jones. I thought those guys were all noticeable in this game. Tyler Bertuzzi's been on a scoring tear. He's on pace for over 20 goals now. He's been playing really good as of late, and he's all around the net. I feel like every time he scores, he's always at the net. He's always trying to score from around there too. So he always does a good job doing that. He's always noticeable scoring around the crease and just very effective at being able to do that and get to the net. And then Louis Crevier is one guy I've talked about a little bit before, but not too much. I feel like I've talked a lot about these other guys like Hall and Jones and Bedard and even like the Brodies, the Dickinsons and Donatos and stuff like that. I feel like I've talked a lot about those type of guys, but I haven't talked too much about Crevier, so we'll talk about him. Just a good puck moving D, like a reliable, steady defenseman who can play up and down your top 6. Yes, he's going to look for more ice time over the course of time, and he's sort of newly acclimated to the NHL, but I feel like for the team that he's been playing on, he's adapted pretty well. And especially to the speed of the wings, the speed of the centermen that are coming through the neutral zone and that he has to defend against. It's not typically as easy to use your feet when you're defending as a 6'8" player. And it typically takes a little bit more time for defensemen at that size to be able to round their games out and be able to understand how to play to their leverage at that size. Because it can be a little bit difficult for players coming into the league who are thinner and don't know how to use their size. Because it's one thing to be 6'8", it's another thing to be physical with it. Because if you're just 6'8", you're just height. But if you're physical with your 6'8" frame, now you become a real weapon and people will actually look out for you. But if you're just 6'8" and you're just height, like I said before, I feel like it's just complete difference, complete opposite effect. And guys can just easily go around you. So that's where playing with a physical edge at that size can really help them. Crevier is not a super physical guy per se, but I feel like adding a physical edge in his game is going to be something that will really, really help him in the near future. If he's able to do it consistently, and if he's able to become more, how do I say this? If he's able to become stronger with his hands, like to be able to negate players' sticks, how if he can cut guys off, if he can limit guys' space in that way. And I feel like him using his hands would be a really effective tool to be able to do that. And because sometimes at that height too, your stick can get overly exposed because when you're just trying to go for a poke check, there's so much space when you poke through at that height that they can go through and try and get around. So I would say physical play is something that he can rely upon a little bit more, but he's been noticeable. I feel like there's been spurts here and there where he's been steadily reliable in so many different facets of the game, and that's allowed him to be able to be a defensively reliable player when needed as well.